The story begins with the life of Ali Han, a graduate student, and was born as the youngest son in a famous otherworldly wizarding family. Our protagonist swore that never again in his life he would go to another place with the word academy in it. However, the magic academy known as Reincarnated completely ignored what our protagonist had promised himself. Han knew that he had to be self-sufficient. Monsters might appear, teachers might be everywhere, but Han knew that in life he had to be self-sufficient. This was the start of a pitiful academy life that Han has never seen before. So will he be able to graduate? Well, not even Han knew. But what he did know was that he was going to live for himself from now on. He knew that schools, academies, graduate schools, he had never go anywhere near of a school. Before, Han was now mounted on a horse, in academic uniform, accompanied by a man who indicated that it seemed that they were going to arrive very soon. Where to? Well, to the best magic academy in the Empire, Einregard. The Lord was commenting to our protagonist that he was completely amazed and thought he had turned into a useless old knight. But now that he had been able to travel with Han, he included that he had remembered when our protagonist was so small, and now he had become an amazing teenager, as well as being admitted to the Magic Academy. Han, with a blank look, thought about how he couldn't avoid to go to schools or even be away from them. Not even in that life. Well, because yes, apparently Han was reincarnated. In his past life, the last thing he remembers is being congratulated on graduating, escaping a life of slavery, according to his best friend. His best friend added that he couldn't believe he had survived years studying under those horrible teachers. Thinking about that, Han also remembered when those teachers were a complete pain in the ass by inviting them to hiking clubs on weekends, to which he told them that such a meeting was too important for someone like him, just to make an excuse and not share time of what is strictly necessary. He also remembered the teachers telling him that he had to be able to do extremely long papers that he had to turn in the same day. But at night, to say no, he accepted those jobs without question, regretting not being able to sleep freshly in his bed that same night. He even remembered when his best friend asked him how many weeks they had been surviving by eating only triangular gimbaps. When he remembered that, he went back to the scene where his best friend, on graduation day, after congratulating him, told him that even though life as a grad student used to suck, he thought Han was so much more awesome than that. Everyone else, something Han didn't believe. However, his friend also told him that he didn't think much about what he had to do, he just did it. Han replied that clearly he had not understood anything he had done, and his friend, with a smile, replied that since he was apparently doing well in that life, why not repeat the school of new? Han, as he was crossing the street to leave, without hesitation, answered no. Thanks but no, because regardless of how he looked in the eyes of others, he had done his best, so from now on, he would not go anywhere related to school or what followed, which was studying. He never wanted to be in a place like graduate school in his life again. Han wanted to live a life just for him. Unfortunately, that life didn't last long because as he was crossing the street, walking away from the university, a driver in his truck was realizing that he couldn't stop. So when he blew the horn at Han, warning him to get away from the street, he couldn't make it on time, so the truck hit him, taking his dreams and his life. So even though his degree and graduation certificate had become completely useless pieces of paper, his decision to stay away from schools carried over into his next life. And if, the next time Han had opened his eyes, he had done so as Li Han Wardinas, the third son of the Wardinas, the largest wizarding family in the empire, but the smallest. Still he remembered everything, all of the above with his past life, but he was surprised. He didn't believe the subject of reincarnation in another world was real. Even so, we meet him, being an adorable brown-haired boy surrounded by toys, wondering if this was really happening. Realizing that he was now a noble thanks to being the third son of a noble family that had wealth and power. Crying, the boy thought that this life was a reward for having spent the life of a graduate student in his past life, and that thanks to that, his time to have an easy life had finally arrived at his door. But I was quite wrong. It turns out that the first rule of the Wardinas family was that the first son would inherit everything in the family, while everyone else would have to find their own way in order to survive. Han, indignant, had to grow a little taller to be able to ask Arlalong, who was the gentleman who was accompanying him on his first day of school, to teach him fencing. He, very excited, couldn't believe that Han asked him to teach him fencing, so he let him know. Han, during his class, replied that he had only thought it would be useful to be able to learn it, since he had nothing to do anyway, and luckily anyone was given the opportunity to learn it. Arlalong asked him if he still intended to follow the path of being a swordsman forever, to which Han replied that no, he wanted to become a mage as that seemed to be the safest path. Arlong stared at him as he blurted that out, to which Han thought he had completely mudded her since that sentence was too empty of ambition. Unexpectedly, Arlong yelled at him through tears that he was quite surprised by how smart he was, since really most of the sons of nobles were quite disillusioned. That is, they were consumed by their lofty ambitions from an early age. So the one hand, the thought of him planning a fairly secure ambition so quickly surprised him greatly. Han, on the other hand, truthfully believed that anyone would be more realistic after experiencing the life of a newly graduated student. So the Knights, the Adventurers Guild, and even the Imperial family, all of them welcomed any strong magician with open arms at any time. Moreover, the best magic academy in the Empire was a place that existed to prepare those magicians' talents. Returning to his reality, already in Einregard, Han was telling himself he was going to put up with a few years of that. Arlong tried to reassure him by assuring him that he would do it more than perfect and that even the Patriarch had congratulated him on his talent. Han, with a smile, reminded him that even he had prevented him from learning magic when he was younger, giving him the excuse that it was dangerous, although he also thanked Arlong for his encouragement. His knight said that he really felt like he was going to do great, but Han was already walking away from him. Arlong told her that she could not accompany him any further as the rules prevented any servant or horse from crossing beyond that point. Han, sighing, knew, so he continued on his way, managing to get out of the way as a carriage sped by, yelling at Arlong to get out of his way as that carriage was the Duke's daughter, to which the Knight of Han replied that the carriage where they were was the prince's. Once Arlong returned the way he came, Han was forced to continue walking until he noticed that there were really a lot of people. He started talking to himself, saying that it was quite an exaggeration that the soldiers standing at the main gate of the academy protected only the nobles, since that academy was only a place that they could enter. He stopped talking to himself when a boy behind him began to tremble, saying that he couldn't sleep without his servant around him. Han looked at him in disbelief, but the boy kept saying that his servant was like his hands and feet, so if he were to enter the academy, it would be the equivalent of cutting off his own hands and feet. Han, even more incredulous, managed to tell the boy that whatever he was saying sounded pretty logical. The boy left him alone while he began to yell that how was it possible that the academy accepted slaves as well just because they wanted things to be fair for all. Also that he swore on the name of his family that he was going to complain about that conflict. Han, not knowing what else to say, he encouraged him to do it when he had time. His answers were not long in coming, since while the boy was walking towards, apparently, a leader of that academy and began to yell at her, the lady raised her wand and made a golden light shine from it. The boy began to repeat something that he would reflect on himself, causing Han to be shocked to realize that this lady had used mind magic on a noble's son without even stopping to think about it. Our protagonist had heard some rumors about what that magic academy was like, so he began to understand them when he observed that scene. Rumors spread letting people know that the monsters lined up inside that academy, and that if you died there they would bury your corpse on the mountain behind. Saying that, the main entrance of the academy opened, revealing a rather creepy green light coming out of it. That light apparently spoke as a voice began to be heard saying that apparently everything they said about Einregard was just an illusion. That same light let the students know that they were stupid and idiots. Han, impressed, felt an immense magical pressure and immediately wondered if that was what the rumors that were spreading from the academy were referring to and if that immense magical pressure was from the director of the place. He also found that he couldn't move. Neither he nor the other students, as they had all been suppressed by his power, and because of that, they couldn't move at all. The voice continued speaking, pointing out that he was very sure that he asked all of them to come with absolutely nothing. But, equally, that it did not matter to him at all since even they did not intend to obey that rule. He was going to enforce it anyway. Saying that, the things that the students had brought began to fly into the sky. Horses, carriages, suitcases, and so on began to levitate, making their owners exult, shouting about who would help them if they took their servants, or how they were going to dress if they took their clothes off. That voice, completely ignoring all those screams, went on to ask why they were all standing there like idiots, commanded them to move their legs, and yelled at everyone to come inside. Now, that was only the first day at the Einregard Magic Academy, and that was the best magic academy in the Empire, right? In the next chapter, we are finally shown the students of the Magical Academy walking through the halls of the academy in complete order, while the voice kept calling them Iron Heads. Finally, it shows our protagonist being called by someone since that someone asked him if he was Han, from the Wardina's family. Apparently, they were no longer immobilized or controlled by some strange magic, since naturally Han turned to see who was asking. She was a short, red-haired girl with incredibly blue eyes, calling herself Yoiner Macon. She introduced herself saying that she was from the Making family, a magician family, just like Han's family. Han told her that it was nice to meet her and told her to please tell him what the problem was. Maken kindly replied that the prince wanted to see him. Han, surprised, asks her who that strange prince was, so she points to a blonde boy who was a few meters away from him, greeting him. Now, what was the best place for talent development and socialization? Well, in regard. Han was thinking that in order to call that blonde prince, his father had to have had more than 100 children. But if he wasn't the eldest son of the imperial family, then his situation wasn't that much different from his. Though he did remember that the emperor had declared that he would not help anyone, so the situation of the so-called prince was worse than that of Han. On top of that, that academy was a good place where the children of renowned families could abound, but his royal family was worse than that of Maken, who came from the Making family. The redhead asked him if he wanted to go with them. Han started to reply, but was interrupted by the taunting of some of the boys behind him, wondering why the hell he wanted to take care of a prince he'd never heard of or even seen before, which Han thought was better than to make enemies. Ignoring them, Han shook the petite redhead's hand and let her know that it was good to at least get close to someone. She thanked him and let him know that she was more than happy for her because up until now they have been constantly rejecting her. The redhead ran off, pulling Han with her. Our protagonist was repenting at that very moment, and when he met the 97th prince, that is, Prince Gainando, he regretted it even more. Maken let her know that there were people who said that Prince was the 101st prince, but Gainando was adamant that he was the 97th prince, as she was pretty sure she didn't want to be among the hundreds. Without hesitation, Han cut himself off from everything that came out of the blonde's mouth as soon as he began to speak. But there came a point where the prince demanded that he know if he was listening to everything he said. Han looked at him and apologized, saying no, so please repeat what he was saying. The blonde didn't think twice to repeat that a guy had rejected his offer, and he didn't understand how he could have dared to do that. Our protagonist, thinking that that boy was completely immature, replied that the guy probably didn't know how noble he was. The blonde asked him the meaning of the word name, to which Han replied that it was of high status and very valuable, while in reality he was thinking that the boy was not only immature, but idiotic and immature. He was an immature jerk. Gainando told Han that that word was more than perfect for him, but the guy had refused his offer anyway, and he was currently talking to Ardenart, and considered it an insult. Han understood why people were running towards her. Apart from the fact that she was the 44th princess of the imperial family, people followed her because she wielded the elegance of the imperial family. That was quite a bit compared to the elegance that Gainando wielded. Gainando, by the way, asked Han if he could scold that guy later since he was tall and well built. Han told him that someone who bullied other people was not noble, but Gainando told him that he wasn't bullying him. Han made it clear that noble people didn't do that, to which Gainando asked him what he had to do then. Our protagonist told him that he had to kindly forgive him, but if he didn't want to do that he could personally request a duel. That prince decided to think things through, so he said that he didn't have to go that far and accepted that, being a noble prince, he was going to forgive him. Listening to that conversation, the little redhead told our protagonist that he was incredible since even she couldn't stand Gainando's stubbornness sometimes. Han asked her what was the reason for her to take care of him being only his relative, but before the girl answered, the atmosphere became quite tense and the voice that had been speaking from the beginning appeared again. But this time with head the thing yelled iron heads at them and warned them to listen well. Before the head could speak further, one of the students shouted that he had been the lick they had seen at the academy's main gate. And it is that becoming a lick is when a great magician overcomes death. Once overcome, they turned into the living dead, which our protagonist liked a lot since he understood that that green flying head was the main one. The flying green head blurted out that it was going to ask all of them a question, so the question was why it called them iron heads. Ardenart, being the only one who dared, replied that it was because the symbol of the rookies was steel. The flying green head congratulated her and told her that she would award 10 points to her bedroom. Ardenart was pleased and asked if there really was a point system for bedrooms. The green flying head laughed and shook his head, saying that in order to become a true wizard they had to learn to see through lies. That annoyed the princess a bit, but the green flying head didn't care in the slightest. He kept talking, saying that yes, indeed the symbol of the novices was steel, but that its quality depended a lot on how they treated it, since it was a product with infinite utilities, and he added that it had many uses, since it was a metal that it suited everything. The students were impressed with his response, until the flying green head shouted at them that they had fallen into his trap again with laughter. She told them that the reason she called them steelheads was because there was absolutely nothing in their brains. The students were outraged by his response, but even so, Han thought that no one was going to answer his taunts. He also thought that although it was not easy to move with that level of magical power density, he believed that after a while it became easier to get used to it, so he started to move his shoulder, although he was surprised that it didn't hurt and ended up thinking that the director had adjusted it. The flying green head started to say that he had spoken harsh words to the future of the empire that they all traveled a long way to. But in his head, when he looked at Han, he was a little surprised that he could move with that amount of density. Finished with his speech, he opened a door at the back of the room, asking everyone to go to that door. After the golden light dimmed, the students saw a dining room as long as Harry Potter's, decorated with food, water, and bread. That green flying head told them that they could enjoy that feast, besides that it hoped that they would be able to relieve the fatigue of their travels with it. Everyone excitedly jumped into the dining room, grabbing food by the handful. The only one who hadn't moved from the living room door was Han. In the dining room there was anything from thick cheese, butter spread on white bread, a plate of chicken coated in oil, butter and seasoned flour braised in wine, au gratin drenched in bechamel sauce, to fresh fish grilled over an oriental style. The most excited about the fresh fish was Gainando, and he stayed that way until the food disappeared and the green flying head started saying that he had fooled them again, and that they were all just stupid kids who didn't pay any attention. Han, as the green flying head continued to speak, thought about how he had heard that if someone turned into a lick he lost something, but he was pretty sure that the headmaster's green flying head had lost more than everything. The headmaster's green flying head went on to say that this academy was the cradle of wizards, so the biggest driving force in raising wizards was yearning. Shouting that, he released among bread, rice balls, clothes, and wands for his students. I mean it literally. He threw them in their faces. The students obviously got scared, and between shouts, someone asked him what the hell were those things. The director replied that this was their uniforms, their meals, and their wands. Gainando was the only one who complained loudly that all of this was too much, to which the green flying head quickly jumped on him, saying that was exactly what he wanted. That fear reaction. He also said that if the food was not delicious, they would have to learn magic so that they could get their delicious food on their own. Plus, if their clothes and wands were rubbish, they would also have to get new clothes and wands with their magic, since that was the rule of that academy. One student was telling another that he would contact someone outside the academy to make things easier. He was unlucky that the headmaster's green flying head heard him. He yelled at her that that was another of the reactions he was looking for. So the first years were not allowed outside the school grounds, so neither were they allowed to ask for things from their relatives, nor from the last students. Letting it be known that that had been all of his report, he wished them good luck becoming wizards and disappeared, leaving all his students in disbelief and quite grumpy to go home. Han was the only one who didn't want it that way. As the headmaster's flying head disappeared, Han began to talk to himself, assuming that all schools had such teachers who were too crazy for the good of others. He knew those of that class well, since in his past life he had a laboratory professor with the kind of madness that his new director had. Gainando interrupted Han's thoughts by running over to where he was, asking him in disbelief if he had also heard everything the headmaster's green flying head had said and didn't understand how that head could treat them like trash. Han replied that maybe the headmaster's flying head was better than his teacher, to which Gainando asked how they were going to live with such poor quality food and clothing for the rest of the days they were there. Han replied that if food, lodging, and clothing were provided by him, then the place he was in was really much better. As Gainando complained loudly, Han began to say that there was little information even in society about his family, and that was because they focused too much on researching magic instead of having any kind of relationship or social life. But, because of that, the misunderstandings about his family grew even more. Listening to everything Han said, he thought that even his family's servants didn't get that kind of bread and clothes. He didn't understand what kind of life his friend had been living, so he let her know that he was more than welcome in his house whenever he wanted. Han, getting out of his thoughts, thanked him really confused, also asked if they should go to the dorms now. Let's see, Einregard accepted any student regardless of their social status. What mattered was that they had talent. However, in order to prevent fights between the sensitive and whining teenagers, the academy's dormitories were divided into 4 parts based on status. First, there was the dormitory called the Vainglorious Blue Dragon Tower. That was the one where only those with the blood of the noble dragon could enter, meaning that the royal family and nobles of high repute like Han and Gainando could stay there. Second was the dormitory called the Tower of the Eternally Burning Phoenix. Only those who had given their all to the divine flame could stay in it. That is, only the disciples of various religious orders could stay there since it was a solemn place. Third was the dormitory called the Tower of the Cliff-Biting White Tiger. Only those ferocious enough to bite anything could stay there. The bloodline of the Knight families stopped there as they were the ones who were prepared to walk the path of the Knight and Mage. In fourth and last place was the bedroom called the Tower of the Black Turtle that sees the future and the past. Here, only those with infinite patience could stay. In this bedroom were various kinds of people, from peasants, servants, slaves, clowns, paupers, merchants to newly promoted low nobles were there. That dormitory had a lower status than the other dorms, so they were prone to being generally looked down upon. Thanks to that, the new students were in low spirits. But there were exceptions. For example, they were great business partners for Han. When they felt Han's questioning gaze, one of the boys outside his dormitory began to wonder why the hell Han was looking at them like that, while the other was sure it wasn't because he hated them. Han, while looking at them, was thinking that he would have to become friends with them since the best way to earn money was through business. Therefore, the experience in real life was the best way to improve in business. Our protagonist lost his train of thought when someone behind him asked him if it was really necessary to take in those boys. He actually called them indecent, but what did he care about? The boys from the Tortuga dormitory turned to look at him, as did Han. It turns out that the guy who had said that was accompanied by two other people, and when Han gave him a dry look, the guy asked if he had said something wrong so he could look at it. So, our protagonist immediately thought how dare he speak like that about his future partners, and replied that he was the indecent one since he had also left everything he had when he entered the academy. So why did he forget about that? And he acted proudly. Han looked at them, thinking again about how the hell this guy could talk about his future partners. With a smile, he watched as those around him supported him by telling him that he truly was more than absolutely right, humiliating the trio of idiots who had bothered him in the first place. People began to notice Han from the Wardina's family, praising him for being what was expected of a great noble. With the atmosphere set, Han was ready to greet his future companions, but before doing so, he didn't expect their reactions. The boys were scared to find out that his last name was Wardina's, so one of them told his classmate not to look him in the eye since he came from a very dangerous family and that the patriarch of the Wardina's family he was a dragon. The other companion replied that he had heard that they were from the bloodline of an ancient spirit. Saying that, they ran away leaving Han with the word in his mouth. When they left him alone, Han noticed that Macon was next to him, so he asked if he was scared of him. Macon immediately replied no, quite confused, adding that he looked dignified as a great nobleman. It is understood that Han had not yet found out how infamous his whole family was, so possibly that is why he had not understood the reaction of the other boys who ran away. Interrupting their conversation, Gainando appeared running towards them, yelling how dare they leave a prince like him alone. The little redhead apologized to her as did Han. As they started walking back to the dorms, Han asked the little redhead if she could continue what they were talking about earlier when they first met. The redhead replied that the reason she put up with Gainando so much was because of Gainando's mother. As Han made up a story of kindness from Gainando's mother to the little redhead and began to tell her about it, the little redhead cut Han off saying that it wasn't out of gratitude. It was just that Gainando's mother was extremely rich, so that she had given him allowances for being friends with his son. A lot of money. Han, listening to her, was petrified for a moment, for the next to say to the Four Winds that then it was his turn to be his friend too. Moments later, their group was already outside the academy courtyard. Gainando was praying that the dormitory was big, while on the other hand Han was surprised that the academy, even though it was just a school, had a lake, a forest, and many other things that he had seen in his past life. He also thought that the green flying head of the director was being very serious when he told them that they had to do their own thing. His group stopped when he saw people muttering things. Han asked the little redhead what was going on, to which she replied that she didn't know. Han wondered to himself why everyone seemed so excited until he saw it for himself. What was in front of him was a miserable 4-story building, very skinny and small, blue in color. He now understood why the people around him called it a pathetic building. More than all Gainando, since he complained that his servant's building was bigger than that and he didn't understand why they needed to live in a place like that. Still, Han cared a lot about it, so he encouraged Gainando and the little redhead to go inside. As soon as they entered, the last thing he heard from his prince friend was that he was getting more and more disappointed. Possibly he wanted to say more, but a giant tunnel swallowed our protagonist, leaving him in a dark void with dots that looked like stars. Our protagonist wondered very nervously what was happening and where were the others. He stopped wondering when a voice rumbled in his head greeting him, asking where he wanted to go. Han quickly understood that things work that way, and that was what was expected of a magical academy. It turned out that this pathetic building was disgusting on the outside, but on the inside, it was a magical tower. Understanding that, Han asked him where he could go. His voice congratulated him, letting him know that he was a fast adjuster, plus the only places available for him to go at the moment were his room and the steel common room for freshmen. Han asked him if it was possible then to go to other places later, to which the voice replied that he could. But he had to know their names and he needed to know other things later to go to those other places. At the moment, it was not possible because the director had forbidden it. Our protagonist, thinking that it was useless to start browsing, asked the voice to please take him to his room. The voice agreed, and before depositing him in his room, he welcomed the young wizard to the Magic Academy. Arrived at his room, Han had a book in his hand. It was his itinerary and his schedule. Reviewing it, the only compulsory subject he had to study was about Einregard. The rest were electives, and you could choose the subjects after taking them the first month. In the book, there was a sentence that said that a magician who sought the truth of the world should decide his own path, and walk it no matter who helped him. That was said by Osugane, who was the name of the head of the director. Han thought that the headmasters, plus he believed that running that academy would be a lot easier than running the graduate school he attended in his past life. Han also thought that the room he was in had everything he needed, although at first he was surprised when he found nothing apart from a bed, a desk, and his closet. He already understood the rules, but still he wondered if he should find out what class the others signed up for. It didn't take him long to decide because in the next scene we can see him in the common room sitting on a sofa next to the little redhead. The little redhead was telling him that she wanted to learn alchemy since she had been interested for a long time, and it was her dream to open my own workshop and supply her products to the Imperial Palace. That sounded great to Han, which she told the girl. She perked up, so she asked if she wanted them to do that together. Han told her that running an alchemy business was not easy, so she needed to think about it. And it is that in the Empire running an alchemy business was quite difficult. This business of spreading bad rumors about his competitors, monopolizing potion ingredients. It was quite complicated. At that time, many of the guilds were fighting for market share, so for Han, something stable might be the best for him. The little redhead, disappointed, even asked him what other topics interested him. Our protagonist thought about her answer since telling her that he was thinking of taking subjects that had less competition and were easier to get good grades. Han's first goal was the management of the Imperial Palace. In other words, he wanted to be an official. He wanted to forget about studies and grades. Specifications were the most important thing to him. But if he said that, it would possibly discourage the redhead. Because of that, he told her that he was planning to choose after taking one or other classes, but he couldn't tell her since he can't say it rashly. When the little redhead laughed at his speech, Gainando entered the common room yelling to the boys that something bad had happened to him, since apparently someone had entered his room to steal because there was nothing in it and it was completely empty. Han and Macon stared at him without saying a word, which made Gainando repeat if they had heard him. And so their night ended. The next day, we had our protagonist reading a book trying to understand the fundamentals of magic since that was the required first-year course. Class times differed by dormitory, but that didn't matter to Han. Pause when he closed his notebook. What impressed him was what was happening with everyone's states. Macon replied that they were all hungry and had not been able to sleep well in their beds as they were quite uncomfortable. Plus their clothes were rough, so that was quite annoying. Han asked him if that was so bad, because, well, come on, that wasn't so bad. And it is that compared to his previous life. Well, in his previous life, when he was at work on the first day, he asked his best friend who had been working there for a long time if he was really reading his schedule correctly since there were no breaks in his schedule at all. His best friend didn't even answer that. The only thing he gave him first was an energy bar, and he told him that that was the food for that day, so he made sure to make it as much as he could since that was the only thing he would eat throughout the day. Han then gave him a death glare, to which his best friend asked him not to look at him like that. Besides, he also had to eat that, but when his schedule was over, a sumptuous feast would await them. Han, crushing the hideous energy bar from him, holding as best he could a smile plastered to his face, told him that if he was ramen, he was going to kill him. By the time they finished their schedule, what was waiting for Han on his desk for dinner was cup noodles and a triangular kimbap. His best friend corrected that he was more than alive, while Han, Well, he was there. Going back to his time, Han was thinking that magic school was so much better than his job in his past life. His classmates found his class door first, so they opened it and almost fainted when they saw who his teacher was. Well, she was a teacher, but she was a troll. It turns out that they were monsters so ferocious and tyrannical that they had gained notoriety among the nobility. The teacher told them that they had found her classroom well, so she sent them to find their seats. Fast. Han had already taken his seat by the time the teacher, Garcia Kim, was introducing herself. She was saying that it was nice to meet you all and that she understood that everyone was scared. But she asked them that there was no need to be, since she didn't eat people. Well, unless she was very hungry. Our protagonist almost dropped her head as soon as she said that. How did she eat humans if she was hungry? The teacher, checking the tension in the room, ran to say that she shouldn't have made that joke. But in any case, she started the lecture. He explained that most of the magic abilities weren't going to be used because magic was too dangerous and couldn't be used until they were all adults. But they were all seeds of the magician who had been nicknamed Steel, so that the lecture was to teach everyone what magic was and to help them find the magic that was best for them. Because a magician's journey was very dangerous, so she would become a compass for all of them. Han's group calmed down knowing that there were no teachers like the green flying head principal, so they began to thank each other mentally between silent cries. Kim kept saying that they were going to start with the basics, so because of that she asked what a magician was. Ardenart quickly raised his hand and replied that a magician was someone who changed the world at his own will. Kim congratulated that answer, but said that something else could be added to it. Because of that, he added that a magician was the one who borrowed magical power and mana, power that came from the origins in order to change the world. Furthermore, everyone who entered that place should be able to sense magical power and be aware of it. She indicated that in order to use magic, they had to do more than that, and that was to gather all the magical power of their own free will, combine it appropriately, and create the results. Kim pointed out that magic used to require spells, certain moves, or reagents, but what was really needed was one's own will, so one shouldn't forget that. She laughed, realizing that she talked too much, so she sent her students to prove what she told them. She ordered them to get up, to take the wand out of her and gather the magic power from her. Han, with some difficulty, did what Kim asked, and as he did so Kim indicated that they all had to keep their magic power on her and think of a light image. The little redhead was trying, as she thought that it was quite difficult, and if that was what it meant to control magic power, as she felt as if she was pulling the reins of a runaway horse, and if she lost control, if she got distracted, there'll be a little. Kim went on to say that while they were concentrating and controlling their magic power, she wanted them to chant the light incantation. Saying that, a dazzling light came out from her wand. As her students were blinded, she kept saying that it didn't matter what incantations they remembered, but it would probably be more than good to have a short incantation so they couldn't lose their concentration. Han had apparently figured it out in 3 steps. Gathering magic power was the first, using his own will to be able to change the magic power was the second, and yelling the incantation was the third. But when he tried, the light that came from his wand blew up his mind. His and all the students too. They kept trying and trying several times until after so many tries, the teacher told them that the light spell was the simplest magic, but that it usually took at least a month of practice to get it, although that was something they had to find out, experiencing it themselves. They gave so many attempts, until only Han was left trying to get a ray of light, even if it was. That until Han finally raised his hand saying that he apologized to Kim for interrupting her, but he wanted to continue. Impressed, Kim thought about how the hell had he tried it 7 times, since even if a new student had a lot of built-in magic power, it usually ran out on the 5th try. Magical power was called energy by certain Eastern tribes. Scholars, who liked to be cool, called it ether, while stubborn priests called it divine power. The origin of magicians did have many nicknames, and since magic power is consumed every time they use magic, young magicians who did not have the necessary knowledge often found themselves with the problem of having insufficient magic power. However, the fact that Han was perfectly fine despite having tried 7 times was beyond incredible. Kim was honestly in awe. And the fact that when she asked his name and he had answered her with his own name and not his last name, caused her to like it a bit more, since equality was kept in practice at the Magic Academy. Still, she asked for Han to come over to her desk. When he did, she asked him if he could shake her hand. Our protagonist awkwardly gave her his hand, and as soon as the teacher touched his, she fell into the depth of her power, and would have stood there, admiring him, if Han had brought her back to reality, asking her if there was a problem. When she told him no, and that they were going to resume the lesson, Han calmed down. Meanwhile, Gainando asked the little redhead if they should save her friend in case they ate him, to which she told him to shut up, telling him that he was an idiot. Kim asked our protagonist to pick her up after school. Han, missed, agreed. Kim, after that, began to tell all her students that she was pretty sure they all felt that, but it was very easy for their magic power to run out, though there was no need to get anxious about it since they were going to gain more magic power with training, and at the same time they would reduce the consumption of their magic power. She let Gainando know that if she practiced too fervently she might get injured, so she had to be very careful when she practiced. Gainando announced that he was okay with that. Kim, on the other hand, also told him that she didn't eat students, to which Gainando, very embarrassed, replied that she felt that way. The teacher ended the class, and she congratulated everyone on her great work. Moments later, we find our protagonist at Professor Kim's door. Once it happened, he asked her what had happened so that she asked him to meet her alone in her office. His teacher told him that actually she had already heard about him from the headmaster's flying green head. From the look on Han's face, the teacher laughed and told him not to worry about it. He pointed out that yes, the headmaster's flying green head might look crazy, but he was kind-hearted at heart, and, although a lot of people didn't know it, the headmaster's floating green head had a keen eye for people, so he would notify all the teachers of the new students. For example, there were 2 that he was warning the teachers about. Han, flattered, couldn't say anything, while Kim told him that she couldn't say anything about that conversation to the director because the reason she had summoned him there was to tell him that he had a lot of mana. Han, confused, the only thing he could tell her was that she understood when the reality was he understood absolutely nothing. Since she did want to quote him solely for that, she could have told him in class. Professor Kim, understanding her student's confused face, explained to him that not only was the mana inside him a lot, but that it was at a level where he couldn't estimate where the hell was the end of it. And it is that the amount of mana is also a type of talent for a magician. If one didn't have enough mana, then he had to go through quite troublesome methods to increase it. But if the person had a lot, then he didn't need to go through those methods and could be much more carefree. Han, quite excited, thought that if what the teacher said was true, then things from then on would be much easier for him. But it was a mistake. As soon as the teacher told him that he was very unlucky, he asked her what she meant and if it wasn't good to have a lot of mana, to which she replied that yes, it usually was, but he had a lot more than he should have. Kim gave him the example that in a glass of water that she held in her hands, it was very easy to control how moderately there was, but with the infinite mana that Han had, compared to a huge sea of water, it was not going to be so simple. Han realized that at that moment, mana control was the most important thing for a mage, which meant that since he had so much, it was going to be much more difficult for him to control it than for his friends to control theirs. As Han slipped into a momentary depression, Kim put a bracelet on his wrist. Han, noticing it, asked what that was. Kim replied that that bracelet was one that could absorb mana from him, thus helping him for the time being. Han was pleased and told her that he wouldn't have a problem if he got his hands on it, for which he thanked her, and as he was about to leave the office, Kim told him that she wouldn't have called him there if it had been that simple. Our protagonist saw her again, so Kim told him that she believed things would be better for him if she used a ton of magic to consume that mana from him. He could practice alone if he wanted to, since there will be no case of his mana running out. Our protagonist gave her a sarcastic laugh, thanking her, but it went through his head, angry, that he didn't need those special personal benefits. Outside of Professor Kim's office, Gainando and the little redhead were accompanying him through the corridors of the academy. While he thought that his future was beginning to look bleak, however, he had to make sure that his academic results were good from the start. First year, so he was wondering if he should sign up for classes that didn't use magic, so he asked his group if they had any classes they wanted to take. The little redhead replied that she would definitely go for alchemy. She also asked both of them if they wanted to take some alchemy classes with her. Gaining at her, laughing at her, he replied that alchemy was for her servants to have fun with her, and there would be no truth that they could learn in alchemy. He also told the little redhead that she was too strange. Macon, very carefully, asked our protagonist to get out of the way, and when Han noticed the clenched fist that the little redhead had, he obeyed without refuting anything. The redhead, seizing the opportunity, called Prince Gainando, and when the boy turned around, the only thing he could see were stars due to the gigantic and rapid punch that the little redhead left him in his face, yelling at him not to dare to get sick or go to the infirmary to ask for potions in his meager existence. Han, from the experience of knowing how to fight because all along had taught him everything he knew when he asked him for training to be a swordsman, that blow was magnificent even in his eyes. Hours later, in the basic alchemy comprehension class, Han was asking the little redhead if it was okay to hit Ganando like that, to which she replied that it would be okay, and she would apologize to him anyway. The next day, Han figured she'd done that before, so he calmed down. Macon told him that there were many students from the other towers in that class, so our protagonist agreed with him, commenting that yes, but it seemed that many of those students were from the Black Turtle Tower. Our protagonist was generally not bothered by the students of the Tower of the Black Turtle, but he was bothered by the looks they gave him. There used to be two kinds of reactions when a commoner met a noble. Either they would get scared and not want to get involved with them, just like the two guys who ran out of Han, or they might show very hostile skills and behaviors towards them, just like the commoners. Two boys who were nowhere near our protagonist. The blonde said to stop looking at him since he was one of the relatives of the Wardina's family, and the other one, the one with black hair, let him know that he didn't care since not even the Wardina's family could do anything inside the Magic Academy. Han could ignore both kinds of people, which he already did, but sometimes things could go pretty bad if he got friendly with them. He and the little redhead continued walking until they reached a small field. Arriving there, the teacher spoke asking if all those who had that class were present. Our protagonist turned to see him, instantly surprised, but since they already had the green flying head of the director and a troll mixed blood teacher, any other teacher shouldn't surprise them so much, although of course, there were exceptions. Having a dwarf as a teacher had to apply as an exception. That teacher introduced himself and called himself Uragolem Jumdar, but they could just call him Uragolem. He said that he understood that everyone was thinking that if there was a school building over there, why did they have to be gathered in a field without blackboards or desks? Ardenart replied that they were there to be able to feel the mana of nature since it was important for an alchemist to realize the power that was in her. Professor Uragolem looked at her like an idiot, causing Ardenart to ask annoyed if that wasn't it. Professor Uragolem looked at our protagonist talking to the little redhead, so he took advantage of his distraction to ask him why. Being in the field, it was a good place to gather these materials, knowing that he couldn't reply. As soon as Han looked at him with a face of not knowing anything about life, Professor Uragolem, apart from looking disappointed, told him that he was an idiot and then corrected him, telling him that to be a new student, he had to use his brain much more often. Han, ignoring Professor Uragolem, thought if he couldn't make a match for him like that. Professor Uragolem, ignoring Han, finally explained that the real reason he had gathered everyone here was to tell them what was really needed for alchemy. But most of them probably thought that all it took was exceptional talent and intricate mana control. But that was far from the truth. What was needed to be an alchemist was the ability to gather materials. Ardenart raised his hand again to tell Professor Uragolem that all materials could be farmed or commissioned, since it was a bit of an exaggeration to say that the number one skill was the ability to only gather materials. Princess Ardenart's companions began to mutter that she was absolutely right, so they didn't understand why they needed to gather those materials, as it seemed a bit strange. Professor Uragolem, very upset for letting him look like an idiot in front of the class, yelled at him that he was an ironhead who knew nothing of the practical aspects of alchemy, since there were only 10% of materials in total that were found. They could cultivate personally, and not all the materials that were purchased were usable because the accompanying adventurers collected the medicinal herbs with great force, so he didn't understand how they were able to pluck something so precious so roughly. He added that alchemists should also know how to gather their own materials, since an alchemist who didn't do that was an alchemist who would never succeed. He ruled that explanation enough, taking the scrolls from his students where they wrote down, so he put them into practice. He magically drew his students a purple mushroom and ordered them all to find that kind of material. Sometime not so later, we have our protagonist with her friend the little redhead, talking about the desecrated herb that was used in antidotes, which was what Professor Uragolem had sent them to look for. Han asked her if he had used it before, to which she replied that he had, but before entering the academy. Heinregard had several vicious rumors befitting and sometimes not so befitting his reputation. And one of the rumors was that dying while learning magic was quite common, another was that magic was quite dangerous, and another was that accidents happened. But, even so, the students had no preparation, so why the hell were they allowed to walk in a forest so dark and full of magic unknown to them? Han pointed out to the little redhead that it seemed dangerous to move in pairs, which she pointed out was right, so they needed at least one other partner to move through the woods, but she didn't know if another partner was available in their tower. Han asked if Princess Ardenart was available, to which Macon told him that she didn't think the princess with the demanding eyes and unattainable status was available at this point, since she was supposed to be with other people. Our protagonist replied that they were only looking for a medicinal herb, so he didn't think it was too late to ask her. When they returned to the class field to ask Princess Ardenart if she was available, Han wondered how the Black Turtle Tower was there with her if they had avoided him when she asked them to join the group. The little redhead, answering her inner question, told her that they were there with her because Princess Ardenart was already famous before she came to the Magic Academy. And that was because among the imperial family, Princess Ardenart was very famous for her extraordinary intelligence and talent. That was one of the celebrity qualities that she was liked by the public. Because of that, many people, regardless of her status, wanted to follow her. Our protagonist, after continuing to look for someone to complete his group, gave up saying that everyone who was there already had their full equipment and was leaving. Besides, he believed that there were only a few students left from the Black Turtle Tower, so that his last chance was that. He couldn't avoid them even if they hated him, since it was too dangerous with just him and the little redhead, so he needed someone from there who could fulfill the weaknesses that were charged. The world seemed to hear him, so they answered his prayers, sending him Nilla, who was staying in the bedroom of the Black Turtle Tower. To the surprise of our protagonist, Nilla was a dark elf from the Shadow Patrol, in the north of the Empire. The Shadow Patrol was an excellent group of hunters and explorers who were active and dedicated themselves to running through the northern mountains as if it were their backyard. For Nilla, finding that grass that looked like a purple mushroom was not going to be difficult at all. She herself said that it was not even that difficult, and although it was her first time hearing the name of that medicinal herb, she did not think it was that difficult to find, since, again, she swore that the forest was like her backyard. She had been surprised to see so many incredible freshmen at the academy, but this was her time to shine. Her thoughts were interrupted by the voice of the little redhead, introducing herself and Han's voice letting her know that they were at her service. Nilla, she thought that the redhead was the girl from a noble family, but she didn't even recognize Han, so she asked them what they wanted. When the petite redhead asked if she wanted to go with them, Nilla immediately jumped on her guard, saying what they planned to do with her. The girl thought that all those nobles and children that came from those nobles were all the same. The nobles cursed those who weren't, saying they were uncivilized, so Nilla didn't care how well they were treated. They always complained that they weren't treated well enough, so how were they any different? Han, trying to calm her down, pointed out that it was dangerous to move through the forest alone, so what was she going to do if a monster appeared? And he was probably going to say more, but Nilla interrupted him, saying that he didn't need it. Han asked why, while Nilla told him there was no way to go with them. Our protagonist let her know that they were not going to use her as bait, and then leave her alone in the woods. Something that made Nilla blush, making her wonder how he had realized that this was exactly what she was avoiding. Nilla tried to tell Han again that she was not going to accept, when he interrupted her by saying that there would be no way in heaven he would let her go alone since she didn't know what was going to happen while she searched, and that even if she would find the grass, she had to pick it up and carry it by herself, so there was no idiot who thought that all this could be done by herself. Nilla, blushingly annoyed, yelled at him that she still didn't know whether to agree to them accompanying her, to which Han told her to shut her mouth, and that her decision was more than made. Nilla didn't say anything else, making our protagonist congratulate her on her intelligence. The petite redhead next to her was thinking about what the hell the Wardina's family had taught her to convince Nilla, but she didn't get a chance to ask as they started moving through the woods. Once inside, Han and Macon were impressed by the ease with which Nilla hung from branch to branch, going through the trees with impressive speed. Macon spoke, telling her partner that she was a very skilled hunter and he didn't understand how he found that out about her. Han replied that according to her leg and calf muscles they were too developed, plus after seeing the calluses on her palms, she figured that she probably used a bow and an arrow quite often. Those were the traits that only a fairly experienced hunter possessed. They didn't know Nilla was listening to them. She was surprised that Han knew she was a hunter just by looking at her for a few moments. She decided to blurt out that he had a strange atmosphere around her, as if he could read other people's minds, until she heard him tell Macon that he was joking with her. He knew that she was quite agile since she had seen the Shadow Patrol symbol on her waist. Nilla slipped at that, giving herself away that she was eavesdropping. Han noticed and asked her, causing her annoyed to respond with a quick denial. Before a fight started, the little redhead let Nilla know to match her pace with theirs so they could go together, which she didn't like. But before she could say anything, our protagonist explained that the little redhead was the only person who could differentiate the grass, so they couldn't find anything if she managed to climb the trees, jumping branch by branch, and then fall. Annoyed, but without refuting that, she asked him what his role was then, to which he replied that since the little redhead's role was to be able to find the grass, his role was to guide. Nilla yelled at her in annoyance that she was doing absolutely nothing to earn the role of her. Han actually, while she was yelling at him, was thinking that she would really get mad if he told her that she was just there for the ride, so he changed her role and told her that it was to protect them both. Nilla, looking at him better, told him that now that she thought about it, looking at her body, she thought that he was from a family of knights. So she also asked him why she was in the Blue Tower. Han replied that he didn't come from a knightly family, but was from the Wardina's family. But unfortunately for him, as he thought it was time for a chance for him to come up with the Tower of the Black Turtle, Nilla squealed her family name in astonishment. Frightened, she repeated to herself that there was nothing to be afraid of. Not because he was a Wardina's, he was a terrible person, and so on. Right? Han, already stubborn by people's reaction, asked his red-headed companion what was the problem with their family. Macon, sighing tiredly, told him that it was normal for there to be crazy rumors about noble families to begin with. But the Wardina's family had some crazier rumors than usual. Our nervous protagonist asked him what kind of rumors she was talking about. One was that the family of Han, that is, the Wardina's family, had a dragon as their patriarch. This dragon is supposed to have burned all the undead with his breath during the undead frenzy incident. Another was that the Wardina's family lineage made contracts with very ancient spirits, and that thanks to that they had the talent for magic, but had lost their emotions in the process. Another of the rumors was that the Wardina's family was quite ruthless because of the wizard Wardinas who appeared during a riot, and an entire city had been decimated. Han, having heard every rumor, understood almost everyone's reaction when he let them know his last name. Even so, he let his red-headed companion know that all this was really crazy since it was having an image that he was a monster that destroyed everything every time it happened. Besides, if a big incident happened, the most normal thing was that the great magicians would have to appear. Why the hell did his family have only those rumors? The little redhead replied that that was why she didn't have to bother too much with them. Nilla, seeing Han turn pale and show traces of emotion on his face during the entire chat he had with his red-headed partner, thought that even though he didn't know the existence of the other rumors she had mentioned, our protagonist definitely seemed to lack none of them. Changing the subject, she ordered her partner to stop complaining and move her legs. Our protagonist complied with that order, still overwhelmed by all the things that Macon had released to him. Nilla continued to hang from the vines of the trees just as Tarzan did in his time, while Han and his red-headed companion remained rooted to the ground, trying to catch up with their speed. He stopped swinging on them when she saw something in the distance from her that caught her eye. When she dropped from the vines, she asked her companions to wait a moment and stop walking. Rushing to the bush near her, Nilla called to them to look at what had caught her eye from above her. Footprints. They were footprints. Nilla told them that something extremely large had passed through that place, but when observing that those footprints were shallow, the monster was definitely trying not to leave any trace. She told them that she was curious enough to know what that monster was since it must have been well trained in trying to cover its tracks. Watching Macon, who wasn't the least bit interested in dying at that age, but always tried to talk back to others in a nice way so they wouldn't feel bad, turn a little pale, Nilla regretted having wandered off again. Nilla thought, as she replied, that everything was perfect. The girl saw the stars, the universe, and the galaxy as soon as she heard that. Nilla repeated to Han if that was interesting, to which he replied if that couldn't be interesting too. Nilla, ridiculously nervous, let him know that it wasn't because of that, it was because he came from a big family, and the things that seemed interesting to her came from the desert. So she didn't know that he was also interested in that kind of thing, and that in any case, one had to be careful when seeing things like that since the monster not only had huge legs, but it was also hard to guess what might appear in that place after all. She said that she had heard that all kinds of monsters lurked inside the Magic Academy, to which the little redhead said that she had heard that too since Reincarnated was a land full of mana, so it was inevitable that many monsters would appear there. But of course they also had many monsters made from experiments or rare slimes that were created from magic potions that were discarded. Han, hearing all this, scaredly thought